Hello and welcome to Atop the Fourth Wall, where bad comics burn. And hoo boy, are we gonna get into some bad comics today! Because the story of Cassandra Cain is about to hit its lowest point. And as the Bee Gees once said, this is just where I came in. Before we get back to her, we need to discuss something about the comic book industry. Namely that it's kind of stupid when it comes to its own business. There are a lot of reasons for that, but primarily it's due to outdated thinking and an inability to embrace what the market wants, and is very, very slow to change. It likes the status quo, but especially as technology and readership shifts, it's unwilling to do what it needs to adapt with the times. That's why we still have unnecessary variant covers even when they're not the selling point they once were in the early 90s. It's why Marvel and DC's YouTube pages barely talk about or promote their own product. Or when they do, it does so either piss poorly, with trailers advertising a big event by having creators come on and say, "This is cool," and "We're so smart," as opposed to giving a general plot synopsis or explaining who the hell half the people they talk about are. Or in DC's case, maybe they'll promote comics, although for a while any videos that were discussing comics were just 30-second snippets of discussions hidden behind a paywall for their streaming service. They finally started bringing the full discussions over to the YouTube page, but it's still rarely about comics. I don't mean to sound like I'm being self-congratulatory here, but a frequent thing that's told to me by viewers of the show is that I helped them get into comics because I explain the backstory. I give detailed talks about the storylines. That's why I stopped the continuity alarm gag. People want to learn about comic history. They want to know about these cool storylines. But DC and Marvel make it so hard to do that! Why don't they have a weekly show on both their channels just going into character history? I tweeted about this months ago and people pointed out a few things Marvel did, but none of it is that great. Marvel 101 is a glorified Wikipedia entry. No, seriously, it's just text with fancy graphics around it. Not even some narration. No one watches a video to read it! The one that many people enjoyed, Marvel TLDR, has the opposite problem. It's overproduced, an amusing animated series summarizing individual issues and storylines, but the result of it being a well-crafted animated series is that it only came out once per month, maybe. And yes, I mean in the past tense, because as of this video, they haven't put out a new one of them since December of last year! Oh, but it's okay. Why would you want to get new readers when instead you could have a cooking show telling you how to make an Infinity Gauntlet cookie with M&Ms as the gems? Now, by this point, I'm assuming you're all wondering what the hell this has to do with Cassandra Cain. Well, the thing is that Cassandra is a victim of this larger problem, that DC and Marvel don't know how to sell their own damn books, and will often shoot themselves in the foot when they do have something good going for them. The tools are there to make something great out of what they have, but they don't know or they don't care how to use them. In the case of DC, I think part of this stems from them being run by creative people and not business people. That may seem paradoxical because of how often we complain about business types who don't care about the creative side of things, demanding stupid things of the creative people, but we forget that creative people are just as fallible and flawed in a different way. And that brings us to Cassandra Cain's Batgirl book. Was Cassandra Cain's 73-issue solo series a sales juggernaut? Was it breaking the top 10 every issue, surpassing the much older, more established Batman titles? Of course not. Its first issue debuted at 64,000 copies, ranking number 11 on the sales charts, and started dropping sales down like any book. But the thing I noticed the most about her book as I look at her sales figures, it would often gain readers, and not necessarily because of tie-in issues. Sure, they'd go down again a few times, but the thing about her book's readership was that it was fairly consistent. Unlike a lot of titles that I've talked about before that bleed half their readership in no time until they eventually crawl to an unimpressive death, Batgirl's order numbers for the latter half of her title hovered around 26,000 for years, going up or down. The book might not have been mega successful, but it had a following. It had people who were dedicated to sticking with it come hell or high water. And instead of taking advantage of that, they just canceled the book. Bear in mind, during the month of Batgirl's final issue, other books that were only doing slightly better than it survived and continued onwards. Batman Legends of the Dark Knight celebrated its 200th issue that same time, and only had about 2,000 more orders than Batgirl. Birds of Prey, Green Arrow, Robin, all books doing only marginally better than it, and they were allowed to stick around after Infinite Crisis. Hell, some books like Catwoman, Jonah Hex, and Hawkman were doing worse than Batgirl, but they were allowed to keep going. Well, sort of. I mean, Hawkman got rebranded to Hawkgirl, but it was the same book. Now, those books suddenly got a slight increase in readership after that month. Why? Because of 1 year later. As I mentioned in the Blue Beetle retrospective, as both a sales gimmick and a way to try to have the characters recover from the events of Infinite Crisis as quickly as possible, all of the DC Universe books jumped ahead 1 year later. So now you've got this big mystery of what happened during that year to entice readers. So why the hell couldn't we do that to Cass? This is what I mean when I say that the problem is that DC is run by creative people and not business people. The creative people don't care about the number she had, they cared only about the creative decisions they wanted to make. Cass was not a character that the higher-ups really cared about, so whatever, cancel her book. DC knew that the book had a devoted following. They knew that the character was doing better than some of their other books, and they just shrugged it off and gave us, well, a lot crappier stuff instead. This is what I mean when I say DC doesn't know how to sell their own books. Cassandra could have had more of a push, could have been a bestseller if they had actually tried to make her one, because clearly she was resonating with people and getting attention, probably thanks in no small part to the rise of fandoms on the internet beginning to talk about characters with potential new readers. But that's another story we'll get to later. But for now, let's finally get down to nitty-gritty and dig into the rest of Cassandra Cain's career. The good, the bad, the very bad, and the better again for the most part.
Welcome to Atop the Fourth Wall, where bad comics burn. Linkara's gonna teach you all a lesson you won't learn. Brodsky, you're not the smartest. Life out, you're not an artist. Anyone who's had a bad comic published, it could be your turn. Linkara, he's a man punch, wears a birdie hat. Linkara, he has a magic gun. Where'd he purchase that? Linkara, coins, robots, Amazon and trucks. Linkara, this comic sucks. Linkara.
A quick thing I didn't bring up last time because of time, Cassandra was actually briefly part of a team, Justice League Elite, which was in turn a follow-up to the popular What's So Funny About Truth, Justice, and the American Way comic. The Elite were a no-nonsense superhero team, all about using lethal force no matter the collateral damage that could result from some of their actions, which brought them into conflict with Superman. Like many people, and characters, they underestimated him, thought he was too much of a goody-good Boy Scout to do what was needed to stop threats, and of course he kicked their asses and frightened them so severely to show what unchecked power and murderous intent could really result in, and did it all without needing to kill or harm anyone. Still, the League thought the idea of a covert ops superhero team had some merit, so they formed the unofficial Justice League Elite, made up of former members of the Elite or family members of them, as well as Green Arrow, The Flash, and Batgirl. The premise is, in some ways, very similar to Cry for Justice, but the difference, and it's a very subtle one, so let me try to explain it to you, is that this doesn't suck. Justice League Elite is dark. It recognizes that you don't just have heroes decide to torture people or be all, "Grr, I'm proactive because I'm hunting supervillains," just like any other superhero team, in order to show its darkness. It's about people who have a past trying to overcome their past. They were deep cover operatives designed to take out the bad guys and will go on a secret mission that involves walking right through a field of massacred corpses and not show any reaction to it. It involves the characters doing some questionable things but recognizing that they are questionable, and yet still trying to overcome darkness and despair. It involves recognizing that darkness is one thing, but if there's no hope, no light at the end, what's even the point? It also involves riding on the back of a giant ferret, because this is superhero comics, and that's how we roll. What's Cass's involvement? Well, like I said, heroes who have a past, so she fits in perfectly. Batman planted her in the group to monitor them and make sure they stay on the up and up under the identity Kasumi, and she gets to dress in bondage ninja gear. She starts forming a relationship with a metahuman named Coldcast, who's framed for murder, but it doesn't go anywhere outside of the book. They win the day, and the Elite were pretty much forgotten, but they did get a nod near the end of Cass's solo title. But now, time for the positivity to stop for a bit. I've been hinting at this for a while, so let's just rip that band-aid off. After Infinite Crisis came 1 year later, all the main DC titles jumping ahead 1 year after those events. Cass's story was continued in the pages of Robin, written by Adam Beechin. Beechin was previously a writer for the Johnny DC books, aka the comics meant for younger readers that were tied into the animated series and whatnot. Tim Drake is attacked by someone while he's blinded by bright lights, and he sends out some batarangs, or robin-rangs, whatever, projectile-throwing weapons that hit a figure. When the lights go down, it's revealed to be a dead Batgirl. Jeez, Cassie, I'm starting to think you're a Time Lord with how often you die and come back to life. Actually, it's not her, rather a former supporting character and villain of Robin's who was murdered and put in the costume. The idea is to frame Tim for Batgirl's murder, which seems to work. Cass has been missing since the end of her solo series, and Tim is trying to locate her. Naturally, the Bat family knows Tim isn't responsible.
I figured it wasn't the real Batgirl. You couldn't have beaten Cassie.
Ha! Congratulations! One of the few times the storyline gets something right! I'm actually kind of in shock. After all the constant bat-dickery that he'd been doing, Bruce elected to go on a journey with Robin and Nightwing all over the world in the intermediate year. However, while in Budapest, a note had been left for Tim in his hotel for his civilian identity, telling him Cass was in trouble and he needed to come back to Gotham alone or she'd be killed. We see Cass skulking in the shadows watching, the implication being that she's investigating too, but she isn't. Nope. Lady Shiva even shows up to Robin to inform him that there's been some kind of coup in the League of Assassins. Their last head, Nyssa, was recently murdered, and Talia al Ghul is busy with the Secret Society of Supervillains, so she's not involved. Shiva doesn't want to get more involved herself, but for Cassandra's sake, she wanted Tim to have that info, especially since this whole thing, along with some other murders, comes across like a job done by the League. Okay, given how Cassandra's solo book ended, everything seems fine at first. Obviously, connecting the dots and setting up an intriguing mystery involving Cass. Maybe she'll save Robin at a critical moment and explain what she was doing for the past year. So anyway, here's where things go off the rails. Examining the fake Batgirl costume, Tim finds a note left for him, and he recognizes the language written on it. Navajo. Bruce taught Cassandra and me Navajo way back. What? Bruce taught Cassandra and me Navajo way back. Bruce taught Cassandra... One of the most... She was still struggling with English. You could have said Bruce taught her C++ and it would have made more sense than that. Quick reminder, Cass did not know the English alphabet. In fact, during the ending issues of comics, it was revealed that she had what could be described as a learning disability because of her upbringing. She still had trouble forming words when recording her audio journal. And you mean to tell me that Bruce taught her Navajo? Navajo! Navajo is one of the most complex languages on the planet, and in fact, is actually difficult to learn in particular for people who are starting with English, but Bruce taught it to her! And the worst part is, This would have just been laughable if it was the only problem, but it keeps going! The message tells Tim that they want David Cain delivered to them or Cass will be murdered, leading us to Robin number 150. Those of you who have been around since the early days of this show, in particular my introduction video and my top 15 worst heroes becoming villain episode, know what's coming. Robin takes Cain out of prison, somehow manages to tie him up, and delivers him right into a trap by the League of Assassins. And their leader, Cassandra Cain, who I guess decided to take up Shiva's wardrobe? Like, seriously, they're wearing the same outfit. What the hell? I'll hold most of my comments for a moment to narrate the details here of what is going on, but, I think you should all know I have opinions about this. So Tim asks her what the hell is going on, and she explains that she killed Nyssa and took over the League of Assassins because she found out about Analia, one of the kids that Cain had tried to raise for the League of Assassins. We actually did see Analia get murdered in a previous issue. Cain is even bummed about her death, which is head-scratching to say the least, given how he was portrayed previously, but let's keep this train a-rolling, shall we? I thought I was the only one you trained, the only one you taught, the only one you loved. It was the only thing I thought I had growing up, learning every day how to kill for a twisted psycho like you. At least he loves only me. Yeah, in Batgirl number 50, when she hugged Bruce and talked about how it was so emotionally scarring for her to not get physical affection from her father. Yeah, I'm pretty sure she was all, but at least he loves only me. Robin is shocked because David Cain had another daughter? Cass, I couldn't risk everything on training one child. Training more than one multiplied my chances of success. And keeping you from each other was only common sense. See, the League of Assassins had me train a bunch of children, and when they failed, I decided to have the entire league train a single child. And then I guess I'd do that multiple times despite nobody mentioning that. It's just common sense. No idea who the hell Analia's mother was supposed to be, considering the lengths Cain went to have the daughter with Shiva. I didn't even get into the full history there last time. Did he murder, like, Cheshire's sister or something to have a daughter with her too? Like, how many assassins did Cain bang to do all this? Anyway, Cass says she did all this to Tim, the murder framing and all that, to turn the world against him and show how there's no justice in the world and how they'll start killing everybody who's evil. Because if there's one thing we know about Cassandra Cain, it's how she's all into killing. Yup, no problems with killing at all. I'm a trained killer. That's the one truth of my life. And we never really change what we are, no matter how hard we try. Yep, definitely the lesson of Batgirl's solo book. Truly, this turn of events was unfortunate, but completely matches what we know about her character. Curse your sudden but inevitable betrayal, am I right? Yeah, as you can imagine, this story didn't go over too well with Cass's fans. And before we continue, we need to talk about fan backlash. There is, in many ways, a sense of fan entitlement and ownership over characters. We often forget that when we're purchasing a book, it's a work of fiction that belongs to somebody else, or in this case, to a company. We cannot assume that just because we're the customer, we should wish ill upon the creators for making creative decisions we disagree with. That we are somehow better qualified, superior to people working the job, and trying their best just to produce a book in an industry that's not particularly glamorous nor that profitable. Seriously, making comic books is not the way to get rich people. As a result, toxic fan attitudes can lead to harassment, threats, and just an atmosphere of bullying that is ridiculous and makes fans no better than the villains superheroes routinely take down. Adam Beechin got a lot of flack for this storyline, And given how bad fan culture can be nowadays, just how horrible it can be to people who are just doing their jobs, or were just an actor in a movie, or maybe they said something that pushed the buttons of terrible, awful people who can't wait to share their awfulness with the world. Yeah, you can imagine how bad it must have been for him. Possibly still is. Harassment doesn't have an expiration date. Some of my colleagues get insults and threats sent against them for stuff that was resolved years ago with the actual involved parties. It's overwhelming and disgusting. I'm guilty of this same entitlement. I'd like to think I've gotten better over the years, but as a fan, I have exercised this same attitude. I never threatened or harassed to the degree that some have, but I know that it would have been so easy for me to fall into the same kind of thing. And not even about people who have been bigoted or racist or sexist or homophobic. I feel no shame in calling out that kind of despicable bile in creators, but Adam Beechin and others who have written a storyline I didn't like? That's not cool. As fans, we need, and we should be better. That being said, I am a critic, as is everybody, as the saying goes, because we have opinions. And it is our right as opinion holders to say, this story is absolute garbage, and I am going to rip this thing in half because I cannot believe how jaw-dropping to the floor, then through the floor, then out the other side of the planet awful it is! And I say that now. Screw this story! I am in awe of how what in the 10th level of hell bad this is! You could only have messed up her character more if it turned out she had been a robot since day one! You'd think the creators didn't know anything about Cass from this story! And that's because they didn't! No, seriously, Adam Beechin knew nothing about Cass before writing the storyline. He was given the assignment to write the story by the higher-ups and got a vague description of her backstory and abilities. Now, for the sake of fairness, there is something to be said of the idea of Cass becoming an anti-hero of some kind. We had seen in her solo series her frustrations at having her hands tied by the law or being told by Batman, "No, don't help innocent people in another country who are being openly oppressed. That's not what we're here to do." We've seen her struggle sometimes with her own nature, her self-loathing, and desire to inflict the ultimate punishment on someone evil. To kill. And maybe, just maybe, she finally gives in to her temptation, or she accidentally gets someone killed in a fit of passion, and we see her struggle with what that means, a return of her guilt and death wish, all the terrible ramifications upon her as a character, and how she feels about her betrayal of the bat symbol that she respects so much. Or, you know, she could just be killing people left and right and suddenly leading the League of Assassins and playing complex mustache-twirling villain schemes because Daddy didn't love her enough. I guess that works too. But yeah, Beechin didn't know about any of her character, so of course he wasn't gonna write a good version of her. He certainly deserves part of the blame for not doing the research on her. According to an interview, all he got was a few issues of her book right before it ended, and while those issues were good, they were hardly comprehensive of everything about her. But the visceral hatred he got online for it was overwhelming! My question is, who decided these things? This is yet again editorial mandate dictating things to a writer who should not have been in charge of this change! And when he submitted his ideas for how he was gonna do the change, submitted the script to the higher-ups, why did no one in editorial oversight go, "This makes no sense with this character, and here's why"? It's Andrew Helfer editing the Titans all over again! If these people don't know anything about the characters they're working with, why do they insist on using them? Once again, editors dictating the major directions of things instead of the actual writers of books! It's not like this sort of thing has gone away either. Ask George Perez about his experiences writing the New 52 Superman. Or hell, even more recently at the time of this video, stuff that happened with the event comic Heroes in Crisis! And oh yes, we will most certainly be talking about that one eventually. In a few months, I'll open the Patreon votes for Event Comics Month 3. I will be very shocked if it's not the first thing people vote for! Anyway, Cass wants Tim to join at her side, spouting the same old bullcrap of Robin, the boy distraction, blah blah blah, and tries to get him to murder David Cain to prove he's ready. Even Robin recognizes this is all messed up and thinks that Cass is being brainwashed, but she denies that and kills Cain. His dying words were admitting to there being other kids he raised. Cain, I'm starting to think this whole raise a child to be the ultimate killer via body language stuff was just an excuse to have sex with a bunch of assassins. Also, we knew about other children being raised by Cain. This isn't new information. Cass didn't care. After Robin fights off all of the League of Assassin goons and looks pretty worn out from it, he decides to fight Cass. Despite, as Batman himself pointed out, Tim should have no chance at all in a match with her, but nope, he's able to get several hits off on her. Now, one thing that fans did get wrong was that they thought this scene was supposed to suggest that Cass just memorized fighting techniques and styles, and thus Robin wins by having no technique, but even Cass says in this that she can read his body tells in the same dialogue. So I think it was just a misinterpretation on the reader's part. It still makes no sense given Cass's backstory and abilities and Robin's, exhaustion, but hey, the story needs every little bit that can help it. The end result is that David Cain's body disappears. Yeah, his death was faked, long story. The League of Assassins goons all have their necks snapped and Cass gets away. So, yeah, the fan backlash was pretty severe. There was a positive kind of response to this, though, and like I said, this is just where I came in.
This is just where I